Hey everybody, how you doing? Well, that's good. Welcome to PHLY Flyers. My name is Bill Matz. I'm your director of fun and games for the evening, and yeah, we're doing real good today, I think. Joining me for a long time no see, everyone on YouTube. Joining me for our second emergency pod of the day is Philly's #1 Flyers beat reporter, live from spring break. It is Charlie O'Connor and Broad Street Hockey's own Kelly Hinkle. So some stuff happened. Guess what, guys? They did things. Now, how much they're saving for our 2-hour live trade deadline show on Friday from the Chegg in Marlton? Who's to say? Maybe some crazy shit's about to happen. But as of right now, the Flyers have made two pretty considerable moves, and we will start with the bigger one, I would say, is the Shawn Walker trade. Shawn Walker goes out to Denver. Our friends at DNVR Avalanche enjoy. He's a lot of fun. He goes with a 2026 fifth rounder, and the Flyers get back a 2025 first, and Ryan Johansen, who has already been waived and is probably going to the Phantoms. Gentleman, react.
I'm pretty pumped. It was kind of a roller coaster of emotions, and I think we're going to go through all of them on this show. But this Walker trade, I don't know how you could be upset with it. This is exactly what we wanted Briere to do. We wanted him to go get a first for Shawn Walker, and he did it. So good job, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to break this trade down, and I'm going to have every single one of those breakdowns in my my write-up that's coming on allphly.com for diehards only later tonight. I wrote a lot of it on the plane because I didn't have internet, so I just kind of was typing away in Microsoft Word trying to figure out how I'm going to break all this down. I'll finish it up after this podcast because I obviously just got into Fort Lauderdale. I was about to fly away when the trades started breaking. So did my best to report as much as I could before I lost internet, but eventually I did. And then there was a 3-hour period where I wasn't able to know what was going on. In any case, look, they got a first round pick for Shawn Walker. That was very clearly the line in the sand that they had drawn, that if you want this guy, you got to give us a first. Now, it's not quite fair to say that they got back first round value for Shawn Walker because yes, they got back the first, but they also took on a bad contract to do it. So in aggregate, that is not first round value. What it really is when you add up all of the amount of money they are taking on from Johansen, that is probably more like they got a mid-second round pick in terms of aggregate value because they did take on a lot of money. However, if you're the Flyers, and we've talked about this for a long time, we've talked about the fact that they need high-end talent. That's the big thing they need. If your choices were, if basically everyone making offers for Shawn Walker was only willing to offer you in aggregate second round value, if you're looking at your situation and you're saying to yourself, we need high-end players, if door number one is a straight second round pick and door number two is we'll give you a first, but you have to take on some bad money to do it, it makes way more sense for the Flyers to go for the first, because you are significantly more likely to get a high-end player with a first-round pick than with a second-round pick. So what I don't like is people positioning this as they got a first for Shawn Walker. They did, but not just for Shawn Walker. They had to take on other things to do it. However, they still got the first in a package back for Shawn Walker, which is very important.
Right. I understand the metrics and the maths and the wizardry that go into determining the actual value of these assets that you get in a trade. But the money that they took on in Johansen doesn't really matter. It doesn't I don't think it hurts the team.
It doesn't matter, but it does. Like, it doesn't matter in the sense that the Flyers are competing for a Stanley Cup. They made it abundantly clear by trading Shawn Walker. They ain't competing for a Stanley Cup, and probably not next year either. What it does matter for the Flyers is that you theoretically could have weaponized this cap space in a different way. You know, we're seeing teams get fourth round picks to serve as middlemen to take on, $1.4 million in cap. The Flyers took on a lot more than $1.4 million. So those are draft picks that they now can not get because they have given up some of their cap space to take on Ryan Johansen. Again, I don't think it was the wrong move. I want them to try to get first. And if this was a way to get a first, right move. However, we talked a lot of the last couple of weeks about how Shawn Walker probably isn't worth a first straight up based on what other defense. Kelly is just it's like, yeah, you're going to say it's not worth it. But based on what similar defensemen have brought back over the last few years, Shawn Walker probably isn't the type of guy that would generally bring back a first. So in order to get a first, Danny had to get creative. And getting creative meant taking on a guy they clearly don't want that much and taking on some money that they could have used in another way. But the way they looked at it is we used it to get a first. Now they have 4 first-round picks in the next 2 drafts, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's sure, they could have weaponized that space in another way. You know what? All those 4th-round... Ron Hextall taught me one thing. All those 4th-round picks, they ain't worth shit. They're pointless.
Not really.
Now, I know I've said, yeah, you can package all those, later on and trade them for something good. Or you can have an asset worth a first-round pick because it is, in fact, a first-round pick. They have that now. Now where that pick is, Colorado, they go and get Casey Middlestat. This could very well end up being pick 30, 31, 32. That is very much on the table here. And we've heard somewhere in the 18 to 22 range, this draft kind of falls off. We also hear that about every draft. We heard there's no generational talent in 2017. You're lucky to get 2C Nolan Patrick. And then there's 3 straight fucking superstars taken at 3, 4, and 5. So no one knows. No one knows. Yeah. But the idea about Danny Briere getting creative is something I wanted to touch on, just in terms of how the few moves that he has actually made, he's set a price, whether it was, okay, I know what I want for Ivan Provorov. This is what a defenseman of his caliber signed to his type of contract fetches. How do we get it? Because Columbus doesn't want to pay all that. They definitely don't want to part with a pick to pay him at, 6-7 or whatever he's making. Okay, let's get LA involved and we'll take some salary back from LA. We'll make all these things work. And you end up getting everything you got in the Provy trade, which is a 2023 first that they turned into Oliver Bonk, a couple of second-round picks. One of them got packaged to move up for Carson Bjarnson. There's Helge Grands. There's Cal Peterson. Okay, yeah, that's okay. Shawn Walker, which you then turned into a 2025 first, and of course, Ryan Johansen now. But you also look at that little stupid thing that happened this summer when they just wouldn't let the Flyers trade Tony DeAngelo to the fucking Hurricanes. And then all of a sudden a second buyout window opened up because was it Cates who filed for arbitration? Somebody filed for arbitration. And it opened up that second buyout window. And it was oh, we can actually buy out Tony D, save ourselves some money, and we'll just send some guy who doesn't matter to the Canes, and they'll give us Rizzo anyway, who at least has played himself into something. He's something. And now you look at this.
He's going to get signed.
Taking back Ryan Johansen so you can get that first-round pick. The idea that he's able to get creative in order to meet his prices, even Nick Seeler contract that we'll talk about in a couple minutes, you don't want that over $3 million. The rumor that came out earlier at 3.3 or whatever it was ooh. I know I'm talking about $600,000 in a cap that's going to be 87 mil, but it just looks better being at 2.7 than 3.3. Okay, let's give him a 2-year no trade because we ain't trading him in the first 2 years anyway. Why would we? We want to keep him. And let's give him a 4th year because he'll play 1 year. He'll play 1 year with to protect Matvei Michkov. That sounds good. He'll be out there and he'll punch someone in the head when Matvei gets boarded. I like the creativity that Danny Briere is showing us. It is a stark contrast from the previous regime.
Also, I think we can I think it's okay now to admit that a lot of the rumors that we saw over the past few days were probably very likely this front office kind of leaking a little bit of stuff out to kind of manipulate the market. Because as Charlie said, for a while there, it was kind of maybe we're not going to get a first for Shawn Walker. Oh, maybe it's not going to happen. And then you started hearing, well, the Flyers kind of want to keep both of them. maybe we like both these guys and we just want to keep them both. We don't have to trade anybody, really. We like these guys. We wouldn't mind keeping them at all. And so maybe those rumors that everyone on social media was getting so worked up about were actually a little bit of chess playing by Danny Briere in the front office.
No, I think that definitely could be.
I mean, I don't know if they were. Yeah. I don't know if they were chess playing. I just think it might just be that this was what was going on and they were exploring everything and they ultimately got what they wanted. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I do think that there is some negotiating done through the media with leaks and whatnot. However, I think a lot of what people think are teams or agents or whatever negotiating through the media is actually that people with the organizations and agents just like to talk and like to gossip. Like, I mean, what I have always said is that don't get mad about something that hasn't happened yet. Now stuff has happened and we can break it down, which is cool. But like, what was it, a week ago that people were losing their minds that they were going to re-sign Shawn Walker? Guess what? They didn't do that.
No. And I'm just like, I don't know if it's so much negotiating through the media. I do just watching how things unfolded over the last couple days. Like, oh, we might not get a first. Oh, we're taking money back? Well, who cares? We got the first. Oh, man, that Nick Seeler deal, it's going to be 3.3. Oh, it's 2.7? Fuck yeah. I think it's not negotiating through the media with the players and agents and other GMs. I think it's trying to manipulate us a little sometimes.
Like, or perhaps, and this is just a theory, perhaps not every single report you read on Twitter is accurate. I don't know, just a thought.
That can't be right.
I choose to believe whatever the last thing I saw was. You know, but I will say, like, today, when I see Tarasenko, and granted, he had a Claude Giroux situation, which tip of the cap to Chuck Fletcher for making that trade work. Like, Jesus, I still don't know how that guy made that trade work. But Tarasenko had a bit of a Giroux situation where it was like, yeah, I want to go to Florida. It's where my family is. So send me there. I'm not waiving my no trade. And they get a 3 and a 4. Now, it could be 2 3s if Florida wins the cup, but it's a 3 and a 4 for Tarasenko, who isn't the Tarasenko we all know and remember, but he's still not bad. He's killed the Flyers this year, I'll tell you that. And when I see that for that guy, oh, shit, Shawn Walker is not Vladimir Tarasenko. Well, Danny did a pretty damn good job then, so I have to give him credit for that. Now it's just like, what's next? And immediately we started seeing the Jacob Chychrun rumors. It looks, I saw some people recently on Twitter just like, listen, they might have been checking in, but there's nothing imminent happening there.
Charlie
Does that make any sense?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you what I've heard about this stuff. What I can tell you is I have not heard Jacob Chychrun's name once in my conversations with people over the last week. That came out of friggin' nowhere. I don't know where Bruce Garoche got that from. Obviously, he's based in Ottawa, but like, I don't know where that came from. What I can tell you, which is why I think there is something here, it just might not be Chychrun or it might not be ready. I did hear late last week that the Flyers have been talking to Ottawa. Like that there could be something brewing there, that maybe like one thing with Ottawa was no, not Giroux, not fucking Claude Giroux. Don't worry.
Bring him home.
But I had long heard that that Ottawa has wanted Scott Laughton for a while. Okay. DJ Smith, who was Ottawa's coach, was Scott Laughton's coach in juniors. He loved the guy. DJ Smith is now gone. My assumption was that with DJ Smith gone, Ottawa would no longer be interested in Scott Laughton. The things I was hearing over the weekend were kind of hinting that like they might still want him because they think there's a culture problem there and he might be able to fix it. And I don't know if that went anywhere, but I do think there has been some conversations between the Flyers and Ottawa about some trade scenarios. I never heard Jacob Chychrun's name in those conversations that I heard about. Maybe nothing will happen. But I do wonder if this is a situation where like there's a kernel of truth in that the Flyers and Senators have talked about things, and then someone ran with it and guessed that it's Chychrun. I have never heard Jacob Chychrun's name. I have heard that the Flyers and Ottawa have had conversations. So it just might be something to keep an eye on over the next 2 days and then into the offseason.
So am I crazy for having zero interest in the Flyers acquiring Jacob Chychrun? Because I have zero interest in that happening. I don't think he's as good as people wanted him to be.
I don't know if I have zero interest. With the number of first-round picks they now have, 4 over the next 2 years, if it is, say, the Florida pick, because the Florida, like, all right, yeah, that's going to be like 30, maybe 32. Like, all right. I could see it. Like, he was really good, I feel, when he got traded last year, and this year it's just kind of been like, yeah, man, guess what sucks? Everything about Ottawa. And maybe he's just kind of fallen into that trap. I'm not sure. I'd be very interested. I'd be very interested in the price. But I'm not in love with the idea of acquiring a 26-year-old defense.
My opinion of Jacob Chychrun, and I put this on Twitter, is Jacob Chychrun is a perfectly fine top 4 defenseman. If he's in your top 4, he's like but to me, like, he's a Travis Sanheim. He's a guy who, he'll show flashes where you're like, holy shit, this dude might be a number 1. And then he ultimately always settles back into just being fine. Now, have guys taken leaps in their late 20s before? Sure, it happens, but it's not something I would bet on. Like, to me, Chychrun is just a perfectly fine top 4 defenseman. That's not the kind of guy that I would necessarily prioritize right now, given where the Flyers are. Unless, like, Bradshaw went to Danny Briere and was like, I could turn Jacob Chychrun into an all-star. Get me this guy. Like, that's the only way to me it makes sense, because he's not a game changer. He's a perfectly solid player, but he's not a game changer. I don't know. I'm not super hyped up about the idea of Chychrun. I am unconvinced that Chychrun even was the main subject of conversations between Flyers and Ottawa. Let me put it that way.
I'd be very interested to know who the main subject. I honestly, the thing I'm most interested in about this, now that Charlie has told us, is that we have somehow turned Scott Lawton into like Mark Messier. Oh, you got a culture problem? Well, we have the best leader in the league. Like,
hell yeah.
You realize he's been on like 6 teams that have fired their coach, right? He's on coach what? In his time, like, yes, he is a part of fixing this Flyers culture. I think he's a good leader and a good locker room guy for this team. But is everyone kidding themselves about what Scott Lawton really is? I hope so. With that said, do we expect any more? Like, do we expect Scott Lawton or anyone else traded prior to Friday's deadline? Or do you think, in terms of major moves, this is it for Danny?
I think this might be it, but you never know. I'm sure they're still talking. This is where you might get the Friday deal might be the deal that sends Twitter irrationally angry because like they throw a 5th round pick for some plug veteran defenseman rather than having to play Adam Ginning 19 games in a playoff race, and then people lose their fucking minds. Like, that might be what happens.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Like, in terms of big deals, I think these 2 might have been the big ones, unless they ultimately decide to move from Scott Lawton.
I want to get to the Nick Seeler part of this in a second, but do you think as of right now, there's no one else. So for Thursday, are we really going to go with Sanheim, York, Stahl, Zamula, Ginning, Attard? Like, is that what we're going to roll? Because that sounds like a lot of fun to me. It could be a disaster, but it sounds like it's going to be fun.
I mean, if you doubt this team is rebuilding, look, that's the lineup that you dress when you're like, I don't really give a fuck if I win this game or I don't, because it doesn't matter. So we can go ahead and trade one of our best defensemen. It's no big deal.
To me, that's the big thing. Like that's the big thing here, because I talked a little bit earlier about how like I don't view this trade in a vacuum to be some sort of coup by Danny Briere. I don't think he like robbed the Colorado Avalanche. I don't think that he got this unbelievable return. He got a good return as a seller. Good job, Danny. To me, the bigger part about this trade, and you know what, it probably won't even do this for a lot of people because some people are so far off the reservation that like they don't care. But to me, if you come away from a trade where arguably their best defenseman this year, their best play driving defenseman, the anchor of their best pairing, if you come away from a trade where they move that guy when they're sitting in a playoff spot and you still don't believe this team is rebuilding, I truly don't know what to tell you. Like if you are so like set on the fact that the only thing that qualifies as a rebuild is if you literally trade away everyone, and the fact that they haven't traded away Scott Lawton yet, and the fact that they re-signed Nick Seeler shows that actually they're all lying to us, like you have problems and you need to reassess your life. Because you know what rebuilding teams do? They trade away guys like Shawn Walker. You know what teams competing for a playoff spot that care about winning now don't do? They don't trade away Shawn Walker. The Flyers very clearly today made it as abundantly clear as possible. They are indeed rebuilding. So I would like to think this ends that debate. I know it won't, because I know there are a lot of really, really wild people on social media who will never accept it unless they openly tank and try to get the first overall pick in 3 straight years. But by trading Shawn Walker, the question that still is out there has been firmly answered. They are rebuilding.
All right, we just got, which is hilarious, who we got this super chat from. Vince, our boss. He asks, why was Ryan Johansen waived? And I that's the last piece of this trade I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
Another, like,
he stinks.
He might stink. He's got to be better than like Cam Atkinson. I realize he's a center and Atkinson is a winger, blah, blah, blah. But he's like better than Atkinson and Licksell, right? Or no? Is he just totally cooked?
So I mean, he probably is cooked, but I do think it's kind of weird that they weren't even like, let's see. You know what I mean? Like, because it's not like the Flyers are stacked at center, so why not just throw him in a couple of games and see what happens? But yeah, and also like Vince could have done like $9.99 super chat.
Oh, that is the Johansen that like we did just get a question like, would Torts even play him? Now they've both downplayed like the level of disagreement that they had during their brief overlap in Columbus when he was traded after 3 months of Torts' tenure, but he was traded after 3 months for Seth Jones. It's not as if like they just fucking gave up on him like a Kevin Hayes or something. They traded him for Seth Jones.
They got value.
And he kind of got the Torts treatment prior to the trade. There was a scratch. There was a 4th line demotion. There was a lot of that stuff that we've seen with a Morgan Frost or even now Sean Couturier, some of that sort of treatment. Do you think that's what this comes down to, or is it just like he stinks, we don't want him?
I can't tell you whether it has anything to do with Torts' view of Johansen. I just don't know. It could, it might not, who knows. I just think the fact that they waived him right away, it tells you that they don't see this guy as anything more than a vehicle to get a first-round pick. Like, I talked to some people in the Flyers organization after I landed about Johansen. First it was, are you going to waive him? And basically everybody was like, well, not are you going to waive him? It was, are you going to demote him if he clears? And it was, yeah, probably. And then the follow-up question was, okay, well, he's got 1 more year left on his deal. What's the plan for next year? Like, are you guys going to buy him out? Is that what this is all leading to? Because the buyout would involve, it would be next year he would have a $1.33 million cap hit. The following year he'd have another $1.33 million cap hit. Next year, if they don't buy him out, it would be $4 million. I guess if they wanted to park him in the minors, they could. That would make it more like $3 million. Still, the buyout is better on both terms. It just spreads it out. I did not get any serious pushback on the idea that they are going to buy him out this summer. That tells me, unless he like absolutely goes nuts down in the AHL and impresses everybody and makes it clear that, like, I want to restart my career and prove everyone wrong, I think that might be the route they are taking. And I think they telegraph that by immediately sending him down to the minors right after trading for him. I just don't think they view him as part of this. I think he is just a vehicle to get a first-round pick, and that's it.
It was pretty wild. Like, I don't even think the Flyers had officially announced the trade before we saw that he was on the waiver wire. Like, it was like immediately.
Before I saw any sort of, like, I'm trying to put the show together and, like, you both are in the middle of something, and I'm like, as soon as we get confirmation, and that's basically when I went, is when I saw the waiver list, and it was like Ryan Johansen, PHI. I was like, well, he's here. that means, like, that's got to mean something. He wasn't here yesterday. Yeah. He wasn't here when I woke up this morning. Like, so that's got to be a part of this. This thing must be done because we put him on fucking waivers. So I went and did the show. But yeah, I wonder if there's any sort of market, because Nashville is covering $4 million of his $8 million cap hit from when they traded him to Colorado. Colorado sends him here as a $4 million cap dump. I wonder if there's any interest around the league in Johansen at $2 million. He's got scoring numbers this season pretty close to Scott Lawton, but he's on a team that, like, scores way fucking more than the Flyers. So you would hope he scores at the level of the Flyers, like, shorthanded guy, you know? So we'll see. I doubt it's probably going to be a see ya in the AHL and we buy you out in July sort of thing. We'll see how that goes. The last bit of news today.
I just want to throw out one theory, and this is just something that popped in my head about the Johansen thing and why they rushed to put him on waivers. One thing that the Flyers might try, and I don't think it's going to work, but they might try it based on kind of what you were saying, Bill, is by putting him on waivers today, that means that he will presumably clear by tomorrow, unless somebody takes him. And if they do, I'm sure the Flyers will be perfectly happy with that. But what that means is that the Flyers will have about 24 hours to try to trade Ryan Johansen after he clears waivers. And part of the pitch could potentially be, look, we'll retain 50% to get rid of this guy. And now you know that if you decide you need to demote him, you can. I don't know. I truly don't know. My guess is that they're just going to demote him and they're not going to be able to find a market, because if there was a market for him, presumably Colorado would have been the one that did the trading. They would have included him in this deal. But it at least opens the door for a possibility of, like, hey, maybe if you're a team that wants, a cheap $2 million fourth line center for the next 2 years, maybe you can go for Ryan Johansen. It just leaves the door open a little bit, but my guess is that he just gets sent down, spends the rest of the year in the minors, and then they probably buy him out at the end of the year, and he will be remembered as the way Danny Briere got a first round pick out of Colorado for Shawn Walker.
Maybe they were just like Joe Sakic and company. I don't know who their GM is now that he's the president, but they were just like, Danny, we're in the middle of this Casey Middlestat thing. You deal with the Ryan Johansen of this all. If you want to fucking cover 50, go right ahead. You deal with this. Chances are the buyout route is where they go. The last bit of news today, it wasn't just a small thing, but the Nick Seeler extension, 4 years, $2.7 million average annual value, a no trade clause years 1 and 2, no protections in years 3 and 4. I can live with 2.7, especially with the cap going up. Someone did the math. It's like 3.8% of the cap for next year or something. Like, I can live with that for a guy who they believe is integral both on the ice and off for this team. What did you guys think of this deal?
I mean, like, is it optimal? No. Like, I wish they didn't sign him for 4 entire years. I think that's a little bit long for a guy his age who 2 years ago was not a hockey player. Do I care? Not really, because I don't think that at 2.7, this negatively impacts the Flyers in any way. I don't think it hampers the rebuild in any way. I don't really think that it's going to block any kids at this point, and they really like him. So like, if this is going to be the pet that they give John Tortorella to keep him happy, like, all right, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I do worry a little bit that it could block some kids. That said, I'm curious to see how the rest of the offseason plays out. Like if they move Rasmus Ristolainen, and suddenly I don't have as much of a concern about Nick Seeler blocking a kid. I do worry a bit as well. I've articulated on the show that if Seeler regresses, as players sometimes do in their 30s, especially one who plays the way Nick Seeler plays, I worry that, John Tortorella will be so in love with Nick Seeler because he's the culture guy who blocks shots that he won't pull him out of the lineup. Even if somebody like Emil Andre is banging down the door and it's like, well, we got to keep Nick Seeler in for reasons. I do worry about that. However, I acknowledge where the Flyers are coming from, which is their belief. Like the people who look at this signing and say, well, this just shows they're not rebuilding. In their minds, and you're free to disagree with this thought process, in their minds, this extension is furthering the rebuild. Not because Nick Seeler is necessarily going to be a big piece on the next great Flyers team, or even necessarily be on the next great Flyers team. The no trade clause is only for 2 years. They could trade him in year 3, or they could send him down to the minors if he stinks. There's a lot of different ways to get out of that deal. What it does do, however, in their minds is they think Nick Seeler's presence really does foster the culture they want to build. And they think the culture that they want to build also helps in player development. So their viewpoint is, by re-signing Nick Seeler, we are creating a culture that will make it more likely that our young defensemen and young players will reach their ceilings. Now, again, you can disagree with that. But they are not re-signing Nick Seeler because it's like, well, we can't afford to lose Nick Seeler. We got to win games. This is just as much about what they think, the impact they think he has on the young players and on the culture as a whole, which they believe, therefore, like, even if it's not Nick Seeler necessarily like putting his arm around Cam York and being like, kid, this is how you got to do this play. They believe, and I've talked about it on the show, that like just Nick Seeler blocking every shot in the world and then limping back to the bench and everybody going crazy, losing their mind over time is going to influence their young defenseman to be like, I should sacrifice for the good of the team too. Like that is the thought process of having Nick Seeler here. And they believe that his presence, his continued presence on the team will create the kind of environment that allows the young players to hit their ceilings. They might be wrong, but it's not like this is a signing that was done because they need to squeeze one more win out of a team. This is a signing that has legitimate implications on the way they want to rebuild.
I put this on Twitter today, and I was looking forward to getting to run this theory by you guys. I think this signing kind of is an acknowledgement of furthering the rebuild, and potentially an acknowledgement that even though we're quote-unquote overachieving this year, we might not be ahead of schedule. Things might take a while, and things might be up and down over the next couple of years. They're going to make the playoffs this year. They might miss them next year. Maybe they're back in. Maybe they're on the bubble. Maybe they have one bottom-out year just because, like, that happens sometimes. Especially if they're thinking about potentially moving Scott Lawton by Friday or this summer, whatever it might be. You want these culture guys around to have a steady presence and a steady measuring stick of like, this is what is expected of you. This guy right here. This is not a hypothetical. It's this fucking guy. Work as hard as him. Yeah. Compete as hard as him. Yeah. I think like as much as, I would have traded him. 100%. I would have traded him. And This 4 years is a risk. The guy's hurt right now. He's on IR. Like this could be a disaster. Absolutely. Now, it's not an Andrew McDonald level disaster because it's half the cap hit for 1 less year on a guy who's better, and the cap's like $20 million more than it was when Andrew McDonald signed. So, like, it's not going to be a disaster.
Wasn't it? It was 6 years, $30 million.
6 years, 30 million.
5, right? Mm-hmm. I never remember what the years and so it's
6 years, 30 million. More years.
Yeah. So, I think it's going to probably be okay, but I do think it's a signal like shit's going to take a while. And we need guys like this around to hold things together while it's taking a while.
Yeah, I mean, he'll have 1 year left on his contract, presumably when it is Matvey time. So,
hey, if Vince wants to give us little bonuses, I'm fine with it.
What a legend.
That's we talked about on the show, and this is Vince's super chat. We talked about, I think yesterday, like, okay, if they were to re-sign Shawn Walker, which obviously they didn't, he is now an Av. I like to call them the Avalanche. My wife likes that. If they were to re-sign him, though, would that kind of just be like, okay, now they have to trade Risto, and that is an obvious sign? Do you think this has anything to do with the potential moving of Rasmus Ristolainen this summer?
I think they probably would have tried it. Yeah. I think they probably would be trying that anyway.
Yeah. I get the sense that Risto is available. I also get the sense they know that it's not going to be easy, that NHL teams like Risto, well, more NHL teams like Risto now. There were always a few teams that liked Risto, but they were the ones that basically thought advanced stats were bullshit, and that all of us nerds were totally wrong about Ristolainen's value. The teams that think that math is real were like, I won't touch that guy with a fucking 10-foot pole. Now there are more teams that are like, well, this version of Risto is actually pretty good. He's overpaid, but he's a pretty good player. Like, we'll think about it. So I think there are now more teams that would be potentially interested in Ristolainen. However, if the Flyers are going to trade Ristolainen, they're probably going to have to retain money, which means that it's not an easy trade to make. Doesn't mean it's impossible. It just makes it a little bit tougher. Danny's shown he can be creative, so maybe it gets done. I don't think re-signing Seeler makes it so Ristolainen has to be moved. I, however, think it makes it easier for them to do it, because now they have a culture guy who fights and hits and does stuff. And yeah, he's not as big of a hitter as Ristolainen, but he certainly fights a hell of a lot more than Risto. He's much more active in scrums than Risto. So it gives you maybe more of a willingness to lose that physicality, because now you got Seeler for 4 years. You don't need, I've always said, I don't understand why they need both. Well, now they've got both unless they decide to trade Risto. So maybe now you trade Risto. But I don't think they have to trade Risto because they re-signed Seeler.
No, but you cannot at this point overstate the importance of Risto being back for the playoffs. Like, we need everyone to see.
I need to see playoff Risto.
And we need him to be the monster that people think he's going to be in the playoffs. Like, I need it to happen.
Kelly, I was literally going to say, we just, like, the most, maybe more importantly than getting anyone any playoff experience, showcasing playoffers. If he can just put one top six forward through the fucking boards in the playoffs, knock a dude out for like 2 games, then guess what? Risto for a first, baby.
Get Toronto on the phone immediately.
Dude, as soon as they get the shit kicked out of them by Florida, Lawton and Risto to the Leafs for whatever they have left.
I don't care what it is, actually. Just take them.
See ya. Bye. All right. Do we have anything else to talk about? I think we've thoroughly covered this. We are, I said 20 to 30 minutes and 39, honestly. I think with the way I estimate time is pretty good for us.
So Charlie doesn't think that we're going to have any.
Oh, okay, I'll go ahead. Sorry, I'm a little laggy in this Fort Lauderdale hotel, but I think my view of the Seeler contract is basically like, cap it's fine, especially as the cap goes up. It's probably a year or 2 longer than I would ideally want, but I get that that's probably what you had to do to keep the cap hit at a level that I would find acceptable. I personally would not have re-signed Nick Seeler, but I don't care. I don't value the culture aspect of it as much as the Flyers do. The Flyers might be right to do that. We'll see how it plays out. Personally, I don't value it quite as much as they do, but they value it a lot. And maybe they're right that culture will allow guys like Jamie Drysdale and Cam York and Bobby Brink and Tyson Forrester to all hit their ceilings. And if that's the case, then an extra year or 2 at 2.7 for Nick Seeler is more than enough. It's more than fair.
So Charlie doesn't think that we're going to have anything fun happen on Friday. at our big
I am
party.
skeptical.
What's going to happen
But
that's
we'll
fun
see.
on Friday? What's going to happen that's fun on Friday, whether the Flyers make moves or not? It's going to be me, Kelly, and JP live from the Chegg in Marlton, New Jersey. It is our trade deadline watch party while Charlie is enjoying himself on spring break in Fort Lauderdale. He's on a trip for the team. Like, they're in Florida, so he's in Florida.
Nice
it makes
partying.
sense. But I sure hope.
Well, Friday I'll be in
beach.
Tampa.
Yeah.
I'll be in Tampa on Friday.
Party
I sure hope you
capital
get
of
a
the
chance
world.
to hit the beach. But make
Yeah,
sure on
Tampa,
Friday,
definitely.
everyone who's not in Tampa or on spring break, make sure you are with us in Marlton at the Chegg for our trade deadline show from 2 to 4 p.m. It's brought to you by our friends at Olipop. It is going to be a damn good time. I'm going to try some of those ludicrous wings. I'm going to try to eat one and do the show. That's what I think. Like, if nothing's happening, we'll just do like our own version of Hot Ones. I think that's what that show's about, right? Like, you eat something.
That would be so fun.
It is pretty much.
Yeah. So that's what we'll do if like all the trades happen. Yeah, if all the trades happen between like today and before we go live Friday, fuck it. I'm just gonna eat spicy wings and see how it goes. Maybe get drunk and you'll get to see me slur my words. Or try to do ad reads drunk. All right. That is all the time we have for you on PHLY Flyers for our little second, part 2 of the emergency pod following the Shawn Walker trade and Nick Seeler signing. We'll be back with you right here on YouTube tomorrow night for the post game from Florida. Charlie will join us. It'll be a great time. Until then, my name is Bill Matz for Kelly Hinkle and Charlie O'Connor. Have a great trade deadline, Philly.
We all silly like the mayor.